Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and welcome to what has to be one of the most chaotic rounds of the championship that I've ever participated in. This video is brought to you by Bruffy.com/support. Head to that link for all sorts of information on how you can support my channel, from links for direct support to referral codes, and even an article on things you can do to help your favourite creators. So I qualified 9th for this race, and again this time, just like we did last month, we had two groups where there was the first 26 drivers were in the group A and then the last 10 were in group B. So even though in total you can see I'm out of 36 of all the drivers, there's actually only 26 drivers in this first race, and then the top 5 from the B group move up into the A group for the second race, so there would be 31 for the final. But yeah, ultimately it's still out of 36 because there was 36 people all racing, and you get put into the group based on your qualifying speed. Now, because of that, things change a little bit in comparison to how they normally are. When there's only one group of racers, we go out for qualifying and then we immediately start the race in the kart that we qualified in. But when there's two groups, the karts get randomized again for the first race, just like they do for the final, just like they do for the qualifying in the first place. So I actually qualified in 9th place in a completely different kart to what I had for the race. And as you've already seen on the very first lap, you might have noticed, it's not the best. And yeah, I've already lost a good few positions on that first lap. I was just getting absolutely hung out to dry around the first couple of corners at the start. I immediately went to defend on the inside, you know, just to try and keep people behind me, but I get overtaken by two people in one straight. And that was pretty much the story of the first half of this race. And I had no trouble, as you probably will see in the first part of this lap here, I had no trouble keeping up with people in the corners, and certainly throughout the entire race I never got overtaken around the rest of the lap. It was only on the straight every single lap someone would come by me, no matter how much I defended on the inside. Like, you know, like I was doing in previous weeks, I would defend on the inside and at least be able to maybe keep people behind a little bit, but the pace difference was so much. Like, this kart is probably one of the worst that I've had across the entire championship. Didn't matter whether it was inside or outside, whether I would defend or not bother defending, people would just come past me. And like I say, it wasn't a problem throughout the rest of the lap. I was quick enough to be able to stay ahead. It was every single time I got to the straight and absolutely nothing that I could do, because what can you do when people are just flying past you on the straight? So, you know, after this point, you know, I get overtaken again, and I'm in 20th place out of 26 drivers. You know, there's only 6 people behind me at this point, and this is kind of where I settled into. Even this guy goes around the outside of me. It was just crazy how slow this kart was in comparison to the rest of the field. I do get back a position there, but then immediately lose one, so I stay in 20th because, again, he would have come past me on the straight on the next lap anyway. But then on lap 7 I did notice some spots of rain on my visor, and I don't think I've ever been happier to see that, given how the first half of this race has gone. But for the next few laps, it wasn't really enough to make a difference. I did notice that I was gradually getting closer to a group of karts in front, so maybe the spots on the visor were enough to knock some people's confidence, but it was still bone dry at this point. The rest of this race was, let's say, quite interesting, and definitely not something that I've ever experienced before, though. I did actually talk a little bit at the time in the kart, not really intending it to be any kind of live commentary or anything, more so to sort of egg myself on, I think. But I'm just going to let that play out and maybe add some subtitles for anyone who struggles to make out what I say, because I honestly think that's the best way to experience the final few laps of this race. So basically you'll just be watching the final few laps of this race as it happened, without me trying to explain it along the way, and you'll be hearing my live reactions at the time. So hopefully you enjoy. Give me more rain, come on! There's 2.
some more. What a mess. Now we're talking. Let's go. Faster cars, what can I do? That'll do. Dry again. Come on.
Wow, what an absolutely crazy end to that race. People just fell apart. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like that before. Certainly not that level of position change either. 15 places in 3 laps, 14 places in a lap and a half, and 10 places gained in half a lap on lap 11. The rain basically saved my race because, as you saw in the first half, I was just going backwards. I don't think I've ever experienced a race like that before either, where it was dry and then it got a little bit wet and then dry again. I was actually really surprised when it gripped back up on that final lap, and I think I would have lost a lot of positions if I hadn't noticed that, started driving properly again, because there were a lot of people behind me as I crossed the line for 5th. Normally it's either completely dry and then completely wet, or it's wet and gets drier and drier as the day goes on. The kart performance just didn't matter anywhere near as much as soon as it got wet. I think it's the first time this season that we've had to do proper wet weather driving, and I think a lot of the newer, younger faces just couldn't cope with it. Maybe they just hadn't experienced it ever before. What a roller coaster of a race though, from 9th to 20th to 5th in 12 laps. Absolutely crazy, and certainly one of the biggest swings in position in any of the races that I've ever done in this championship over the years. And I'm really pleased with how I managed to pretty much maximize what I could get out of that. For the second race, the heavens truly opened whilst we were sat on the grid. You might be able to see the dry patches on the grid, as that's where we were before the race started. And yeah, it got very wet very quickly, and basically it was completely wet lines for the rest of the day. And this is normally what happens, it'll be dry and then it'll rain and then it'll be completely wet. That's why it took me by surprise that it got dry again towards the end of the first race. So the difference with this race to the previous one is that obviously this is the final, which is where the trophies are handed out, but the starting positions for this race are the finishing positions for the previous race. So basically everyone who already had experience and was already reasonably decent in the wet were already starting all up at the front, because those are the ones who had finished up at the front in the previous race and managed to survive those few laps of damp track. So there wasn't an awful lot of changing of position in this one, because the gaps sort of extend. And for me, the last time I drove in completely wet track conditions like this was 2015. So it was sort of another learning experience for me, as this whole season has been, remembering how best to maximize this sort of thing. And I don't think I did at any point during the race, but I certainly got a lot quicker over the first few laps as I remembered, but I was still quite far off the top guys in terms of ultimate lap time by the end of the race. So it was more of a, like I say, a learning experience, and trying to remember all the things that I used to do in wet weather driving around this track back in 2014, 2015. So ultimately there wasn't much changing of position. Obviously you saw I dropped down to 6th place off the line, but apart from that I stayed in 6th for quite a while. I did get a nice opportunistic overtake to get into 5th place as we were making our way through some back markers, of which there were a huge amount in this race, because only 12 drivers in this race finished on the lead lap out of 31 who were on the track at this moment. So it was kind of crazy. A lot of the overtaking that I was doing in this race was just getting around people who'd either spun it around or were just slow or didn't know the right lines. And when it comes to wet weather driving on a kart track like this, when we're all on slick tires still, you don't get wet weather tires in higher kart racing or anything. You want to be doing the outside lines all the time. So where people normally drive, the rubber from the tires gets laid down on that part of the track, but when it gets wet, that is a lot more slippy than the parts of the track where people don't normally drive. So basically you want to be putting the kart in places where you wouldn't normally put the kart on a normal racing line on a normal dry day. So that's what I was doing, obviously, and I think, like I said before, a lot of the newer drivers to the championship, or the younger guys, had never maybe experienced that, so they were just trying to do their normal lines, and ultimately it's a lot slippier and more difficult to handle, and you just go a lot slower. Now later on in the race I just set my best lap as I was continuing to sort of find my way and get quicker and quicker, but I did make a small mistake and I ended up losing 2 positions to drop down to 7th. And I think honestly I probably was in a relatively comfortable 5th place, and I probably would have finished 5th, which was the same place that I finished the previous race. It might have been a double 5th place finish, but I was kind of, again, trying to experiment and figure out exactly how to be a bit quicker and relearn the skills that I had when it came to wet weather driving. So I was trying to experiment a little bit, and obviously that caught me out with the spin, but I ended up only losing 2 positions because I still had a massive gap behind. So at that point I just kind of settled for 7th place, realizing I had a massive gap behind of about, I think I ended up 16 seconds ahead of 8th place, 34 seconds ahead of 9th place, and like I said, only the top 12 drivers even finished on the lead lap. So the gaps just got huge, and honestly it was a lot of fun to be back driving in the wet again. It is good fun, you get the back end out a little bit, you're sliding around, you're trying to find where the grip is, and like, you know, it saved in the first race, it completely saved my race and saved all my races, because it was looking like I was going to be finishing in the bottom 5 or 6 drivers in the first race, and I've ended up getting a 5th and a 7th out of it, which isn't too bad in the end. So yeah, happy with the way that I sort of came back through the sort of the wet, the difficult wet conditions, and was able to at least use some of my experience and some memory to figure out how to keep it on the track and gain a lot of positions when a lot of other people didn't. So yeah, it was a really interesting round, this one, especially that first race. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like that before. And the second race, which is standard, you know, wet track driving affair, where I was able to at least keep it on the track most of the time and only had one little spin. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Let me know all your thoughts down below in the comments, what you thought about this one. It was a bit chaotic, but there also wasn't an awful lot to talk about outside of the very small number of overtakes and those very last few laps of the final part of the previous race. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you're still enjoying this series. Let me know all your thoughts down below in the comments, and as always, I'll see you next time.